Apparently, all it took was a 5.5 hour weather delay and an emptying of a stadium and some fans running for their lives, it looked like, from lightning strikes in Blacksburg, Virginia. But nonetheless, Purdue football walks out of Blacksburg, Virginia with their first win of the season and head coach Ryan Walters' first head coaching win of his career. What's going on, guys? I'm Dakota, or Boiler in Texas if you know me online. We're going to talk about Purdue's game against Virginia Tech, take a look ahead at their game against Syracuse this weekend in prime time, as well as take a brief look around what happened in the Big Ten last week and what to expect going forward. Let's go ahead. Let's jump on into it. Purdue started their weekend off unlike any others, it would seem like, but actually not even too dissimilar to some other games that we saw. Purdue started this game at 11 a.m. Central, 12 p.m. Eastern, for those of you in the Eastern time zone. And we got about 10-ish minutes, maybe not even that far into the first quarter before severe weather in the area forces them to evacuate the field and the stands, where in the next 6 hours was a wild case of we have no idea what's going to happen and we can only expect what we can moving forward. We spent a good portion of the day wondering if this game was even going to be played. We saw multiple reports of, we're going to reevaluate the field at this time, and that time came and went, and then nothing came of it. And then they said, okay, maybe this time. There was talks about the coaching staffs not wanting to stay and play this game at midnight, whether or not the game would even be resumed at all. Thankfully, after a good long 5.5 hours, 5 hours maybe before they took the field again, the game resumed, this time in prime time in the evening slot. It is not very often that you see a noon game finishing up in prime time, but this was one of the rare exceptions. Of course, there was the issue of watching the game, as obviously when a game goes from a noon slot to, I think, resuming at about 6 p.m. my time, there's not a whole lot of TV options, and so this game actually ended up being finished up online, streaming only, which I know made it pretty difficult to follow for everyone who was looking forward to seeing this game play out. But nonetheless, after a long day in Virginia, Purdue walks out of Blacksburg with a 24-17 win against Virginia Tech. A very exciting game that really came down to the wire. This was a game of wild runs where the beginning of the game, Purdue came out pretty much firing on all cylinders, quickly taking a 7-0 lead before the weather delay. And then even after the weather delay ended, they came back out and it actually built up a 17-0 lead, looking like they were going to run away with this one before ultimately, as we've seen many times before in this program, kind of melted down towards the end of the first half and ended up going into the half, tied it all 17, and in a very frustrating sequence of events where how to put it? It really just was Purdue making the mistakes that they couldn't afford to make. A questionable play call in terms of going forward deep in our own territory on fourth down. And while I don't mind the call to go forward on fourth down, Purdue's offense had been moving it fairly regularly in this game so far. It really was a question mark more of the play choice. It was a design quarterback run from the shotgun. I think at that point, I'd much rather have either given it to Devin Mockabee or get up under center and try and make something happen from there. But nonetheless, we're going to move on and continue on. And from that point on, it really kind of was just a defensive slugfest until about 5 minutes to go in the game, where Hudson Card, Purdue quarterback, gets in for his first rushing touchdown of the season to put the Boilers up 24-17, where the defense was then able to close it out, sealing the first win of the season and the first win for Ryan Walters as the head coach. Let's go ahead. Let's run down the stats, just hit the highlights. I think we've all seen it at this point. Starting with the offense, we'll talk about Hudson Card, obviously getting in on his one rushing touchdown of the game. He ends up picking up about 16 yards on the ground in this one. And while 16 yards wasn't, the most, he did have 12 carries. And so I'm excited to see potentially Hudson Card kind of start to use his legs a little bit more. We saw it a little bit more against the Hokies, that he was, taking out the run, picking up those short to medium distance runs and kind of taking what the defense was giving him. So that was a very welcome sight to see. I know I am therefore seeing it continue on. In terms of the passing game, he finished up 23 of 34 for 248 yards. No touchdown throws, but I think that had more to do with the weather more than anything, as well as I think Virginia Tech kind of was selling out on stopping the pass, and their run defense not necessarily being the best, as we saw in the rushing statistics for this one. Devin Mockbee leads the way with 21 carries for 95 yards and a touchdown on a beautiful 15-yard scamper. Basically kind of, off tackle, make a read, and then just manages to get 15 yards, making some nice moves and getting in the end zone for Purdue's first score. Tyrone Tracy also gets in the end zone on the ground with 4 carries for 51 yards with a long of 22, which I believe was his touchdown run. Was another really fantastic run. Purdue really took advantage of a poor Virginia Tech run defense to end up with about 180 yards on the ground on 46 carries. And so we actually, rushing leads the passing attempts in this one. But like I said, the weather, I think, kind of played a big factor in this one. And so it was nice to see Purdue get a run game going. I was kind of hoping to see Mockbee cross 100 yards, but that is going to have to wait. Hopefully we might see some of that this weekend. Looking at the receiving statistics for this one, Purdue did a very good job of spreading the wealth on this one. I think Virginia Tech was kind of selling out to stop Deion Burks in this one. He only had 1 reception for 18 yards, and it was a very big reception, a long third down conversion to go for 18 yards across the middle of the field. It was a fantastic catch. But Max Clare, what I believe is a freshman tight end, leads the way with 8 receptions for 64 yards. I think he showed a lot of great promise, and honestly, I was very, very impressed to see his production in this one. I think he always managed to find that little soft spot on sort of those check down kind of, security kind of plays, and even took a play out of the Payne Durham, refused to go down and break off a long of 27 as well. So it was nice to see Claire come in and have an impact in this one. Another receiver I think played very well, TJ Sheffield, goes for 4 for 60 with a long of 36 and a beautiful little diving catch on a deep ball from Hudson Card. It was nice to see him. And then another guy, I'm going to say this about a lot of these guys, another receiver that I'm excited for is Abdur Rahman Yassin. 4 receptions for 58 yards with a long of 26 for him as well. I think he has started to come on strong in this last game, and I'm excited to see him potentially kind of take on that safety, that safety outlet kind of role that I think we saw a little bit of Max Clare. I mean, he seems very sure-handed and made some really good plays. Other than that, it was just kind of getting some people out of the backfield. Dylan Downing, Tyrone Tracy, and Devin Mockbee all have 1 or 3 in Tyrone's case for the low teens amount of receptions. Dylan Downing gets 1 for 14 yards, which, hey, we'll never say no to a running back getting 14 yards out of the backfield. It was also nice to see, although it might have been only 1 catch, or really he wasn't in the game that much, Garrett Miller makes his first appearance of the season, tallying 1 reception for 8 yards. It was nice to see him get some game action, and while I don't blame them for not giving him too many more minutes, I'm excited to see him make it back into the lineup and provide that, that veteran leadership and a very, very, good tight end for this team, and it'll be very nice to see him back in this one. Taking a look around the defense, Dylan Thieneman absolutely had himself another game, totaling 7 tackles, including another interception. He currently leads the team in interceptions with 2 on the season. Cam Allen also gets in on the interception party with one of his own. He kind of cut off one of those slant routes that Virginia Tech seemed to be just feasting on in the early part of the game. He kind of just cuts the route and ends up getting a takeaway there. We could go on a long time about Cam Allen and the way he's been in coverage this season, but he always does seem to have one of these moments every once in a while where he makes a great play and kind of all is forgiven for at least a little bit. But at the same time, we definitely need to see more out of this secondary, and specifically Cam Allen, who has struggled, we'll just say, to start the year so far. Taking a look at the big boys up front, the defensive line was very good in this one. I think they controlled the line of scrimmage beautifully. Nick Scourton, 3.5 tackles for loss, 5 total tackles, 4 solos and a sack. Isaiah Nichols, 4 total tackles, 4 solos with a sack, and 2 tackles for losses. O.C. Brothers gets in the tackle for loss. Keedron Jenkins gets a tackle for loss. Sanusi Kane gets a tackle for loss. I mean, the Boilers were flying around everywhere in the backfield getting these tackles for losses, which is absolutely fantastic to see. This defense, I think, made a huge jump from week 1 to week 2 that I'm excited to see what we can do going forward. They're going to be tested again this weekend against Syracuse, but I think it's hard to talk. We'll talk about it more when we talk about Syracuse and their season up to now, but it has definitely been it's going to be a different challenge, but at the same time, I'm excited to see what we can do against another Power 5 team. Let's see. Elsewhere, what do we got? A handful of punt returns, nothing too much to talk about there. Ben Freehill goes 1 of 2 on field goals with a long of 43. He probably should have been 2 of 2 on field goals, but Purdue unfortunately trotted out 10 players for a field goal attempt, which of course he absolutely sailed down the middle before having to take a timeout beforehand to get the correct number of players on the field, and unfortunately he missed it just a little bit wide on the second attempt. Jack Ansel had a pretty average day. 6 punts, about 39-yard average, 2 stopped inside of the 20. Pretty solid. Over on the Virginia Tech side, their quarterback ends up going 16 for 33 for 243, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Pretty tough day for their starting quarterback. But again, it's hard with passing stats and the weather that we saw. I mean, it was an absolute deluge there for a little bit. And he actually ended up being replaced, but I believe it was just the final drive, by their backup, Kyron Drones, who ended up not having enough to really make much of a difference. Something I should have mentioned with the defense, and I'm being reminded of it here looking at the Virginia Tech rushing stats. Purdue held Virginia Tech to only 11 yards rushing on the game, which I believe is a record for a true road game. Not overall, which I can't remember the exact stats, but I do know it is a new record for a road game. Very impressive stuff. That's what I'm saying. This front seven might be the strongest position group on this Purdue team in general, holding a team on their home field in a weather situation which really should lean itself towards being more of a rushing game than a passing game. To hold them to only 11 yards is really, really nice. And at the same time, they only had 22 carries as a team. And so Purdue did a very good job of controlling the pace and controlling time of possession in this one, and really limiting the opportunities that Virginia Tech had. And I think that also just goes to show, how quickly they kind of went away from the rushing attack, because they just weren't getting anything for it. In terms of passing, Virginia Tech ends up throwing for 275 yards. Pretty solid game for them and through the air. They get 2 touchdowns through the air. I think that's kind of pretty indicative of the troubles that this Purdue secondary has had, that they have more success through the air in a game where there was a 6-hour severe weather delay. Other than that, not too much really to talk about. Their kicker goes 1 for 1, obviously, to tie it up at 17 in the first half. Purdue's defense had very good moments in this one, and the offense had some pretty tough moments at the same time. But it's I'm never going to complain about going on the road and beating a Power 5 team in their home stadium, especially after the adversity they had to go through with the ever so mentioned weather delay. But I think that wraps up Virginia Tech. We'll see what Virginia Tech has in store the rest of the season. We'll have an opportunity right now to kind of take a look at what Purdue has and how really this result stacks up to what we're going to see the rest of the season. I'm never going to complain, like I said, about going on the road and winning a true road game at a Power 5 stadium. Virginia Tech might be struggling, but at the same time, a win is a win. And especially after that weather delay, man, I cannot imagine what it would have been like to be having to try and stay loose mentally and physically 6 hours after the game started. But let's go ahead, let's move forward and talk about Purdue's primetime matchup this weekend against the Syracuse Orange, who are currently 2-0. And if I do some quick math, it looks like they are currently, in terms of points for and against, they are leading that stat by, what is that math? They beat Colgate 65-0, and then they beat Western Michigan last week 48-7. So, I mean, you're looking at all of 113 points to 7. Of course, the teams that they're playing have to be taken into account. But regardless of that, I mean, Syracuse is putting up some numbers, and that has to be respected at least to a little bit. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about their individual games. We'll spend the bulk of it kind of talking about what I want to see this weekend. Their quarterback, Garrett Schrader, sounds familiar. He was a quarterback who led them against us last season, threw for 257 yards, and they even had their backup in there for a bit against Colgate and threw for 115. They combined for 7 touchdowns to an interception. Colgate is not good. They're not expected to be good. They are an FCS team going up against a Power 5 team on the road. Syracuse put up numbers, and I guess that's kind of what you want in your first game of the season. Get someone in there and you can work out all of the kinks and figure things out. Not going to spend any more time than that on Colgate. They rushed for 271 yards, threw for 406. I mean, it was a beatdown from start to finish. Moving on to their next game against Western Michigan, they win 48-7. Again, this is just another one of those that you really can't take too much from. Western Michigan kind of, trends out to be one of the worst teams in the MAC this year. And so, again, you have a pretty bad MAC team going on the road in a Power 5 environment, and I don't think that's going to end up very well. Granted, we can't, discount everything that Syracuse was doing. They did hold Western Michigan to 7 points, and they ran away with it from there, and they didn't turn back. So we've seen plenty of times where Purdue's built big leads and kind of let it whittle away as the game has gone on. But nonetheless, Syracuse throws for 340 yards, runs for 150, throws a couple of touchdowns, runs in 4. It was a beatdown for sure against a pretty bad MAC team. But nonetheless, if we take a look at Syracuse and kind of what their stats have looked like so far, Garrett Schrader's thrown for almost 550 yards. The secondary is going to be tested. Now, they might be missing, I believe, their top wide receiver threat. I haven't seen anything on him. I know there was a report that came out earlier this week about whether or not he would be available, but we'll have to wait and see. But really, we could look at the stats all we want, but I think the thing that we're looking at the most here is what do we want to see out of Purdue in the nighttime Ross-Ade environment for the final non-conference game of the season. And I think the things I want to see, one, kind of talking about off the field, I want to see that stadium packed. It's a sellout. It's going to be the first night game of the Ryan Walters era. I think the energy is going to be amazing. Even against Fresno State, the crowd was incredible for a noon game. I am going to be so hyped up to see what this team has to offer in a first night game. I think it bodes well for Purdue that it's playing at home. Obviously, going on the road, we probably should have beaten Syracuse last season. We won't have to talk about what happened down the stretch. But the discipline issues that we saw last year in this game obviously aren't going to be there. I think I can't remember the exact stat, but I think Purdue compared to last year is effectively just not penalized in terms of making those kinds of mistakes compared to what we saw last year. Purdue has no turnovers on the year. They don't really commit that many penalties, which is fantastic to see. And Purdue, I think, is just going to have to come out, keep their heads, and absolutely just make it happen. This is a game that Purdue, I think, should win playing at home. The real question, I think, in this one is going to be which defense shows up the most, and that is one thing that does give me a little bit of a pause. Obviously, Syracuse seems to be a team that wants to throw the ball around a lot while trying to stay somewhat balanced, but I think once Purdue takes away the run game, like we seem to have been these last couple of games, it's really going to come down to, does this secondary have what it takes to get a stop, to make the necessary plays to keep some Syracuse from making those big chunk yards and big plays through the air. I'm excited to see what happens. They say the jump from week 1 to week 2 for a defense is the biggest jump, but I'm hoping that the jump from week 2 to week 3 can be just as big for this team. I think getting the experience under their belts will be extremely beneficial. I think the other big thing that will be playing in Purdue's favor is the fact that Purdue has played 2 very, very good games so far against decent teams, at least Power 5, and a group of 5 team who won 10 games last year. While Syracuse has played, I think I put this on Twitter, FCS toothpaste and a literal bottom of the barrel MAC team. And so I think Purdue has the edge in terms of playing in this environment, this type of game already this season. And so I think that helps Purdue as well. For Syracuse, I think it's going to come down to containing the Purdue offense enough. It seems like there hasn't necessarily been a wide receiver to step up and be, that true number 1 guy. While they have taken shots downfield, I don't think Purdue also has that speed and height along the edge that might be able to take the lid off of the defense and kind of keep them honest. But at the same time, I think we're also seeing a Purdue offense which has been more balanced than I think we've seen it the last few years. Obviously, the last couple of years, it's been the Charlie Jones show, the David Bell show, the Rondell Moore show. This season, it looked like it might be the Deion Burks show, but he obviously was held in check by Virginia Tech, so we're going to have to see what Syracuse elects to do. The thing I liked last week was seeing Hudson Card spread the ball out a little bit more. Obviously, they were focusing a lot on Burks, but he was able to spread the rock and keep the defenses honest. I think it also helped that Purdue ran for 180 yards on the ground. I think Devin Mockabee, we finally got to see some play calls that put Devin and Tyrone in positions to succeed. Getting them towards the edge, letting them use their speed and elusiveness to kind of make big plays happen. I'm excited to see what we can do against the front line of Syracuse on terms of when we're on offense. If Purdue can stay pretty balanced on the ground, I think that bodes pretty well. if we can have success on the ground to open up the passing game. But if we become one-dimensional through the air, I don't think that bodes too well for us. I don't know if our passing game is that cohesive enough at this point to really make those plays. Obviously, you never know. It could just all click together in a week, but time will tell. But I think Purdue needs to stay balanced. I'd love to see the pocket getting moved with Hudson Card a lot more. Get him out on the edge, let him make decisions, and use his legs if need be. And I'm excited to see potentially Garrett Miller come back. I think he was listed in the depth chart at the top. Whether or not he actually plays a full game is yet to be seen. I think the fact that we got to see him in Virginia Tech at least a little bit bodes well. We might see him kind of in a similar role, maybe as potentially a slight bump in productivity and inclusion, but maybe not a whole game, but time will tell. In this one, I do like Purdue to win. I think it'll be relatively close. I think Syracuse's offense might just be a little bit more clicking at the moment. Obviously, getting to play some less than stellar competition, I think will help that a lot. But at the end of the day, Purdue, iron sharpens iron. Like I said on Twitter this week a few times, Purdue's played some very good teams and knows what it takes to play in these games and be competitive. Syracuse hasn't had to really worry about it too much. Their closest game, I believe, was at the end of the first quarter against Western Michigan, where they led 17-7 before Western Michigan didn't score again in the game. So I think if it really comes down to where each team is at in the competition they face, I think Purdue edges it out there. I believe I predicted a 3-point win for Purdue on Twitter. I can't remember the exact score I said. I think it was something along the lines of 31-28, something along those lines sounds about right to me. I think it'll be close. I think it's going to depend entirely on who can get in the end zone and who can stop who. Obviously, that's it for every game, but for this Purdue team, I think it's now more than ever. But let's move on quickly. I know I've been rambling on here for a little bit. Let's take a look about notable scores from last week in around the Big Ten. Kansas takes down Illinois on a Friday night game, 34-23. Illinois looks pretty pedestrian in this one, or Kansas just looked pretty good. I think we'll learn a lot about Illinois this weekend when they host Penn State. Well, I do expect Penn State to win that game. Illinois, I think, has more to lose than anything. They barely squeak by Toledo, followed by a road loss to Kansas, who, hey, I'm all about, running the Kansas hype train, but we'll see what they're made of this weekend. Indiana defeats Indiana State 41-7. That's all we need to mention about that. They play Louisville and Indianapolis this weekend. Gonna be a fun game to watch, just in terms for both teams to kind of figure out where they're at. Michigan fails to cover against UNLV, winning 35-7. Ohio State, I believe, covered. I think the spread was about 28 points, something like that. It was something close. I think they did cover. They won 35-7. Ohio State has looked severely underwhelming so far this season. Not necessarily having the results that we kind of expected out of the usual Death Star in the Big Ten East. It might be a fun season to watch the Big Ten East this year. Penn State pounds Delaware into the dirt, 63-7. Wisconsin goes on the road, loses to Washington State 31-22. I don't see why everyone is talking so negatively about Wisconsin based on this result. It was a night game on the West Coast against a Washington State team that I think was being pretty severely underrated so far this season. And after this loss, which granted only a 2-score loss, 9 points, I'm not worried about Wisconsin. Obviously under a new head coach, it is what it is, but I don't see why everyone is so down on Wisconsin based on this one result. A team that we are probably rightfully so to be down on, Nebraska goes on the road, loses 36-14 to Colorado. Jeff Sims, I think, leads the country in turnovers or something like that. He has not looked good. Matt Rule might need to make a change there, but at the same time, he might also be their best option. But Nebraska hopefully gets a get-right game this week. They need it severely. Iowa goes on the road, defeats Iowa State 20-13. Once again, not meeting that 25 points per game mark that they need. That's going to be one of the more fascinating stats to watch as the season goes on. Michigan State, I'm not going to talk about it here. What an absolute dumpster fire of a program, an athletic department, and a university, and how they responded to recent things that have gone on there. That's all I'm going to say. Defeats Richmond 45-14. Wasn't necessarily particularly close. Richmond scores 14 in the fourth quarter in garbage time. Northwestern gets their first win on U.S. soil in, I believe, almost 2 years, as they beat UTEP at home 38-7. They go to Duke this weekend in probably one of the more fascinating nerd bowls that I've seen in a very long time. Maryland struggles with Charlotte early, actually goes into the half down 14-9 to Charlotte before ultimately running away with it 38-20. Minnesota walks away from Eastern Michigan 25-6. I think we'll learn a lot about Minnesota this weekend as they go to North Carolina. That's a game I expect North Carolina to win, but at the same time, it'll be interesting. We'll learn a lot about Minnesota. And finally, Rutgers beats Temple 36-7. Another good game from Rutgers, who suddenly find themselves on the precipice of going undefeated in the first 3 games of the season as they host Virginia Tech this weekend at home. A game I would probably expect them to win, but I guess we'll see. Another one of those fascinating games that I'm looking forward to seeing from a sicko's perspective. But there it is around the Big Ten last week. Most notable results, I think, is Kansas, Illinois. Kansas taking them down. Other than that, Nebraska being turbo cheeks potentially is very funny to me, although Purdue isn't too far behind as they have also struggled, but at least they've won a game on the road. The Brian Ferentz versus score 25 points challenge is still in full effect. He is 0-2 so far. And Maryland struggling against Charlotte. I'm wondering if that's just a September Terps thing or if that is something to keep an eye on. I know Maryland was going into the season with pretty high hopes. Hopefully that is a trend of playing against the type of level of competition more than anything else. But other than that, briefly going through the week 3 games around the league. Maryland hosts Virginia. I expect Maryland to roll in that one. Illinois hosts Penn State, like I said. I think Penn State wins this by at least 2 touchdowns, although Illinois might keep it close if it gets weird. Wisconsin gets a get-right game against Georgia Southern. I expect them to win. The Indiana-Louisville game is probably one of the more interesting ones to keep an eye on. Not just from as a Purdue fan perspective, but I think this could be an interesting measuring stick for both of these programs. Louisville hasn't played anyone particularly good. I don't think Murray State is a good barometer. Neither really is Georgia Tech. So playing this one on a neutral site will be very, very fun. North Carolina hosts Minnesota. North Carolina, I think, is better offensively than Minnesota, which might be the difference. Duke hosts Northwestern in a Nerd Bowl that I think could get weird. Duke, obviously, this season already taking down Clemson at home to start the year. Going to be a little bit of a different atmosphere hosting the Purple Nerds. Iowa hosts Western Michigan, the same Western Michigan team that just had 48 hung on them by Syracuse, although Iowa is allergic to scoring 25 points. So I expect Iowa to win. I do not expect them to score 25. Rutgers and Virginia Tech, we kind of talked about that one a little bit. I think that's going to be also a good barometer for both of these schools. I think Rutgers is better, but it's really going to come down to what can they do in that game. Ohio State, Western Kentucky. Ohio State looks allergic to scoring offensively in this year as well. So a 28-point spread to Western Kentucky looks pretty juicy in terms of going towards the Hilltoppers, Michigan State and Washington. First game off of the Mel Tucker controversy, things that are going on over there. Abolish the program, the athletic department rather. Washington, I think, runs in this one. I'm picking Michigan State to cover, but I think that might just be more from a home field advantage perspective, although I would also not be surprised if Washington runs away with it. Nebraska gets an opportunity to get in the win column against Northern Illinois. Hopefully Jeff Sims only throws multiple picks this one, as Nebraska potentially can get on the board. Michigan hosting the juggernaut that is Bowling Green, I believe, in their final game against without their head coach, and rounding it out primetime, what we all came to see. Purdue, Syracuse. I'm taking Purdue to cover and win this one. It's going to be a fun one. I think it's going to get weird, although it seems like based on last year, that's none too surprising. But guys, that wraps it up for me in this one. Starting next week, I'm going to start doing multiple of these. I'm going to do a post-game video and audio podcast coming out either Monday or Tuesday. And then I think I'll reserve this Thursday afternoon, Friday afternoon slot for more of a pregame for the following week. These can get kind of rambly and long. And so I think cutting it in half might not necessarily be the worst thing in the world. But what do you guys think? Let me know if you enjoy the audio version of this podcast. For you audio listeners, go ahead and give me a rating on whatever platform you're using to listen to it. We'll be back again next week talking about the results of Purdue, Syracuse, as well as what's going on around the Big Ten. But until then, I appreciate you guys. And until the next one, I'll see you guys then. And as always, boiler up, hammer down, hail Purdue.